Hey, are you wondering what the weather is like? Well, find out what it takes to be a meteorologist with one of our favorite weather guys, Erik Maitland.
Hi, I'm Dennis Vanderginst. Join me in a series of entertaining and interesting conversations with entertaining and interesting people. We'll explore various aspects of the human experience and what makes life more fun. This is Uncommon Convos.
Welcome to Uncommon Convos. I'm your host, Dennis Vanderginst, and before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to ask you all to subscribe, register, and review Uncommon Convos on your favorite podcast platform. You can also contact us, comment, suggest guests, and watch the video version of this and all of our podcasts by going to uncommonconvos.com and following the links. Today, our guest is Erik Maitland, weather guy extraordinaire. Erik grew up in Minnesota. Then he left to become a proud Arizona State Sun Devil, where he studied meteorology and broadcasting. After a stint forecasting in Phoenix, he returned to his Midwestern roots with stops in Traverse City, Michigan, Iowa City, Minneapolis, and the Quad Cities, where he's been a staple at KWQC, the NBC affiliate, for over 20 years. So, Erik, I want to thank you for joining me today. My first question, how's the weather?
You know what? It's finally looking better than it has been. I don't think we had a whole lot of frost this morning, and sun is out. Everything's green. I'm starting to really dig it.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that's the kind of question you've got to get a little bit tired of, all the jokes about the weather and being blamed for the weather when it's bad and all that type of thing. But I do want to revisit something I just mentioned in your bio. So you had this stint in Phoenix. I mean, how challenging can that be? Isn't it like every day it's like, yeah, today's weather, it's hot, it's dry?
Well, that's another common misconception. I always wanted to write a book. Had I stayed in Phoenix, I always wanted to write a book called Fire and Ice, The Four Seasons of Arizona, because they really do have four seasons. But before I get onto that, I just a really quick anecdote about that. A few years ago, well, not more than a few years ago, when my kids were young, we were visiting my parents in Scottsdale, and this is after, of course, I had been away from the valley for quite some time. But we got into the hotel room that we were staying in, and I sat down to watch the news, and my oldest daughter, who was only about I want to say 11 or 12 at the time, sat down next to me because she was eating something, and it was raining that night in Phoenix. The first 10 minutes of the newscast were as if we had a tornado outbreak here in the Quad Cities. It was rain, 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 live report of rain over here, a live report of rain over here. And and she looked at me, she said, "Dad, do they have anything else they can talk about?"
Right.
So yeah, when the weather changes in Phoenix, it's a big deal. But no, there were some forecasting challenges. There's something in the summertime called the monsoon. It gets really hot, really humid, and that's the key, because when you get these big thunderstorms, yes, you're going to get severe weather. Yes, Phoenix is going to get tornadoes, and then they can, of course, get, because of the heavy rain, all kinds of flooding. In the wintertime, you can get snow, which is some of the most beautiful snow I've ever seen in my life, Dennis. I would get up in the morning after a storm had gone through during the nighttime hours, and the mountains that surrounded Phoenix and Scottsdale were white with snow, but there was no snow down at the valley floor where people live. And then because I'd missed it, because I was a Midwesterner, sometimes when I was off from school for the day, I'd drive up into the mountains, and there would be these, saguaro cactus, the kind of cactus that you think about when you think of the Old West, covered in snow. And it's just a beautiful juxtaposition of snow on the desert. So yeah, there are many different types of weather. Even in Phoenix, they have their four seasons. And I will say, while I was still in college and interning at the NBC affiliate in Phoenix, and actually I was really lucky because I got the chance to be on the air even before my college career had ended down there. The one morning that it snowed on Camelback Mountain, I had that in my forecast, so I was pretty happy about that.
Nice. Well, you mentioned how everything was all about the rain when you were there, and it was raining in Arizona, in Phoenix, and it's kind of the same thing when you see snow down south. I mean, the traffic stops, the stores close, they close up the schools. It's obviously it's what are you prepared for? What do you see, in the course of a normal year? So I guess, it really does depend. But obviously, you eventually moved back to the Midwest where we have all kinds of different weather issues, and we'll jump into that. Would you say that it's more of a challenge, the weather forecasting is more of a challenge in the Midwest than in most places in the United States?
Yeah, I really would. And I would really say here in the Quad Cities, it's the biggest challenge I've ever had. I've worked north in Minneapolis. I've obviously worked south. But right around Iowa, it's at this latitude, we're kind of in that constant transition zone. So, as much as I hate to say that our 7-day forecast really can't be that great after about 4 days, and sometimes they are. I mean, we've got the technology now that sometimes, we can tell you that it's going to rain Sunday afternoon on a Monday or Tuesday, and it does. Sure. But especially during the wintertime and when the progression of weather systems is faster, spring, fall, winter, long-range forecasting is really tough, and it can even change within a day or two. So, and think about this, when you watch the news, in any newscast you watch, there's always a weather forecast. Sure. I mean, that's because it's always changing. I mean, sports casts you might see once or twice a day, but once the sports score is put in the books, that's history. Right. We're always trying to get the best lead time on something that's going to happen weather-wise as we can. So you'll always see a weathercast in a newscast because we're always trying to fine-tune the forecast. And, any forecast is just as good as the information that we have. So the more information we get, which is better, closer to the arrival of any weather system, the better our forecast will be.
Yeah, and for those listeners who aren't in the Midwest, it's kind of an ongoing joke that if you don't like the weather in Iowa, just give it an hour or two.
Yeah, right. Just wait 5 minutes. It'll change.
For sure, and it really does. So, so what is it that got you into meteorology to begin with? What influenced you to go into this career path? And when?
This is a bit of an interesting story because it had its pauses and it had its, brilliant moments. When I was a kid, I was between 4th and 5th grade, so I was somewhere around 9 or 10, and I grew up in the Twin Cities in Bloomington, Minnesota. And one afternoon, I was out, and I was kind of a loner as a kid. I'd find my own thing to do, and I'd usually be doing something outside. Well, one day I was outside, and it was a beautiful day. In the morning, got home, ate lunch, went outside again in the afternoon, and just noticed that the sky in one direction had just turned like pitch black. And it was coming at me, and it was this thunderstorm moment that inspires a lot of people. And no matter if they're poets or future weather people, but the storm was coming into my neighborhood, and I looked down to the end of my street, and all of a sudden I could see the wind picking up because all the garbage cans were flipping over and coming my way. So I decided at that point, probably a good idea to get in the house. Got in the house, and we lived up on the top of a hill, or the neighborhood dropped off below our backyard, so I could have a great view of the yard, or the yards that were behind me. And I was at the back window watching the storm go by and watching the clouds spin and all this. It wasn't a tornado or anything, but it was a really good storm. Mm-hmm. And that kind of inspired me to find out, why did that happen so fast? What made that change? So that summer I went to the public library, got out all the weather books, and I started reading those cover to cover. And within a few weeks, I was making my own, forecast and putting them up on the refrigerator. I mean, I'd draw maps of our city and stuff, and I'd put in fronts, and I'd go out and I'd sketch all the clouds and make my own satellite photo from below, kind of. And thankfully, I still have those 6 sheets of paper that I posted on. I post those on Facebook every now and then just to say, hey, this is where I was a long time ago. So that got me interested in weather. My friend and I, we had tape recorders, so we were already pretending we were doing radio shows or TV shows, whatever, just without the cameras. And we didn't have movie cameras or anything like that. We had tape recorders. So when we played tennis in the street or baseball or hockey, where you twist the knobs and make the little guys turn, we would commentate that. So. Back then I had the foundations of broadcasting and meteorology. And it wasn't until I got to college and I started working at a TV station in Phoenix behind the scenes because I was also interested in television production. Thank you, Price is Right, for showing the cameras every now and then on the TV show when I was a kid. I thought those cameras were cool. I got to operate a camera. So I got into TV. I operated studio cameras. And one of the people that I worked with there also worked at another station in Phoenix where they did news, the NBC affiliate. And she said, if you're interested in weather and TV, you should come spend an evening with our weekend weather guy and see what he does. And I thought, okay. After all these years, I'd never put the two together. It was her telling me that I could, sit in with the weather guy for one evening. And when I did that one night on a Saturday evening, 10 minutes in, I thought, this is it. This is it. This is what I want to make a living out of doing. And, from that moment on, I pretty much knew I had to twist my area of study in college, which my dad wasn't real happy about because he was, broadcasters, they're a dime a dozen. You're never going to make any money or have a career there. So I double majored in meteorology and broadcasting. And as I said, what happened later on is I got an internship at that station that led me to being actually on the air a year before I graduated. Tough to do back then. Not a lot of people started in a major market for TV. So I had a really nice tape when I wanted to get out and do it full time after I graduated. So.
Well, it's clear, and then we've known each other for a long time. And of course, anybody who has been in any of the markets that you have been broadcasting within knows what a passion you have for the weather, as well as obviously a clear command of the information and whatever is necessary in order to do the forecasting. Which is great when somebody's got that passion from an early stage and is able to follow that career path. But at one point you told me, and I don't know where this fits in all of this, but you told me you did some modeling too.
I did?
Yes, you did. Maybe it was hand modeling. I don't know.
Wow! This is coming at me from left field. I don't remember that.
Well, maybe this will give you a context. We were actually, it was your birthday.
My 50th birthday.
I wasn't even going to say
5-0,
that.
okay.
Yeah.
That's out of the bag.
And maybe it was somebody else that told me that about you. Well, certainly those of you who are watching the video could tell why he would be a good model. But if you didn't do any modeling, then there's nothing to go into there. But we can certainly see that he could have and would have been a good model as well.
Well, I will say that my mom was a model, and she was a model back in the 40s and 50s, and she had a lot of pictures that I saw as a kid of her, standing in front of the old Admiral refrigerator or TV or something, and classic, long, thin figure with the skirt down below the knees and the nice dress and the little hat and, pointing at products. And so maybe we talked about that.
That might
unless I was a baby model and I don't remember it.
Well, it might have been. It might have been the discussion about your mom, and maybe the context was, of course, as I said, it was a party, so who knows what was being said and how it was being interpreted at the
Dennis,
time.
I'll tell you what, if I need to lose about 10 or 15 pounds so I can be a model now, hang out on the beach and get millions of bucks and a nice tan, I'll do it.
Absolutely. Okay, obviously, though, your path has always been, or at least from an early age, meteorology. And I'm interested in knowing. You've indicated how lucky you were to jump in even before you were out of college, and so I'm interested in knowing how that path has evolved, because you're the chief meteorologist now. I don't know at what stage that occurs, and but what kind of cracks me up, and I'm sure you've seen this. Is when you see these YouTube videos of a guy doing the weather out in the weather and obviously not happy about it. One in particular came up just I don't know, maybe a few months ago, where he's in the snow and the anchor is kind of throwing the broadcast to him and asking, well, what's the weather like? And he basically is saying, well, if you can't see it, then I don't know what, I mean, he's getting really snarky and upset. Have you ever had to do that kind of reporting on the weather?
Well, I've been stuck in it, yeah. And I'll tell you what, it was the worst time span that I had that was up in Minneapolis. And it was the morning show that I was a part of. And yes, when they would send me outside in the morning at the coldest times of the day on a Minnesota winter day, when the wind chills were down to minus 30, minus 40, and I literally had about 6 layers of clothing on, and it was pretty rough. I mean, I can remember 2 instances, and one when I was standing next to Interstate 35 in Burnsville, which is just south of the Twin Cities, one of the southern suburbs, and I was next to a Best Buy and I think a Perkins restaurant, and looking right over an interchange at 35W and one of the other connecting freeways. And I was there for about 4 hours, and I think the snow depth had increased close to 8 to 12 inches in the time span that I was there. And yes, between shots, we could get into the van, but the van wasn't any warmer than it was outside. Sure. And I had just gotten some new outerwear from my brother, who used to be in the recreational business, and he gave me some samples, and everything was blue. Everything was this very pretty blue. And when I got back to the station, and it was all I could do to put this over, sweatshirts and sweat jackets and sweatpants and 3 socks and everything. And, they looked at me like I was the kid in Willy Wonka who became the blueberry. And from that moment on, I was pretty much known as the blueberry. But that day was probably the coldest day that I'd ever had to do any reporting outside. And it's ingrained in the memory, and it always will be.
Is that, would you say that's also like the most dangerous condition in which you've had to report, or have you done, have you been in the path of tornadoes and things of that nature?
I've never been in the path of a tornado. I've come into a little area that got hit by a tornado afterwards, and it really changed my perspective in a way. But yeah, winter weather is pretty much the most dangerous, because you're out there for so long, and the risk of exposure is so great that, yeah, that was probably the most dangerous thing that I was ever in. And yeah, I was at that point kind of thinking, this is pretty ridiculous. Here we are out here for 4 hours telling people traffic is bad because of the weather. The weather is bad because it's just so bad, and you can just stay in the house today. So there I was.
You stay in the house. I'll be out here. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the guys too that do the reporting on the hurricanes. Now, I know you haven't been in those markets where you're going to have to be doing that kind of reporting, but had you ever been in a hurricane?
No, I've never been in a hurricane per se, but the last time Michelle and I went to Key West, a pretty good storm rolled through. And I took the opportunity, because I was in the parking garage of a hotel, to turn my phone on as a camera and pretend that I was doing a hurricane report. And so, and I was taking it off my face and putting it on the waves that were crashing over the beach and everything, and looking at the palm trees that were all bent over, and looking out to see where the waves were coming in from. And I think the most pleasure I got out of that video was sending it back to KWQC to one of my coworkers to say, hey, I finally got an ocean storm. And so I got back and we laughed about that. But that's really the closest I've ever been. Although hurricanes, they're like winter storms. I mean, they take a long time to develop. You can track them for a long time. And when they hit pretty hard. And my thought about hurricanes, and this is a terrible way to think about a hurricane because obviously they're deadly storms and you don't want those. Just like even as a weather guy, I don't want tornadoes because they break stuff and they kill people. But hurricanes for broadcasters are money because for nowadays you can be a hurricane specialist and a forecaster for a Gulf Coast radio station if you live in Juneau, Alaska. I mean, we've got the technology that you don't have to be at ground zero. But as soon as one of those storms starts to form in the Atlantic, you can start doing radio broadcasts specifically on that storm. And I say this because one of my first coworkers did this. When I worked in Michigan, he had a bunch of radio stations that he provided weather for on the Gulf Coast. And every time hurricanes were starting to form way out in the middle of the Atlantic, just off the coast of Africa, he would start doing radio reports and ka-ching for him. He was making money. Yeah. So, well, strange perspective on a deadly storm, I know.
No, but I mean, it's part of the business. And obviously it's something that stations are well aware of. I've had occasion to be down and around in areas when hurricanes were developing and never, I mean, maybe a category 1 or something like that where I might have been there. Is 1 the least?
Yeah.
Okay. But I will say this, those listeners who were in central and northern Iowa last year will remember the derecho. And at its worst, that was very reminiscent of what I had experienced myself in a hurricane, and would suspect that a lot of people would equate as kind of the same level of intensity.
Yeah, absolutely. A broad wind field of 100 to 120 mile per hour wind, just full force coming right at you, not twisting like a tornado, but just slamming in and then just continuing to pummel those areas for hours, really.
And as far as I can recall, I'm sure this might not be true, but how often do we experience a derecho like that in the Midwest? I don't recall ever having been through something like that before.
Yeah, this kind of proves how myopic we can get. I mean, if it doesn't happen out our back window, we just think it doesn't happen. But derechos, that cross the Midwest every 4 to 7 years, there can be one. I mean, it can be even more frequent than that, just not quite the same scope. But a major derecho like that every 4 to 7 years, I think, we've had a couple that I can remember in my time here hitting the Quad Cities. They might not necessarily have been referred to as derechos, but we can go back to 2011, I think 2007. Certainly they can be smaller than the one that we had last year, which was a very broad. I mean, that thing went almost 800 miles into the eastern United States. But they're just like really any type of weather. The more extreme it is, the rarer it is. So to see a derecho like that anytime soon hitting the same areas, it's going to take a while. But maybe later this year or in a couple of years, one just like that might happen a little farther north of here or a little farther south of here. They're out there. I'm trying to remember how long it's been since we've been calling them derechos, which is a Spanish term, I believe. And I think it's been post 2000. But before then, they certainly existed. Just like the polar vortex. I mean, sure. I learned about that in the 80s in college. It's always been there. And we've called it meteorologists have called it the polar vortex for decades. It just got sexier, within the last 5 or 6 years.
Sure. Well, in preparing this is always weird when you're trying to interview someone who you know, but in preparing some of the information that I wanted to discuss with you, when I was looking up derecho, I also came across the term downburst. Is that the same or a similar phenomena?
It's different. Downbursts are, you can have microbursts, a macroburst, and they're both downbursts. It just depends on the scale. You can have downbursts from many thunderstorms. The difference between a downburst and a derecho is a downburst is more localized. That will happen from one thunderstorm. It's a huge pocket of cold air that just drops out, hits the ground, spreads out in all directions, and because it's such a massive quantity of air, when it hits the ground and spreads out, obviously because it can't go below ground, I mean, you can get wind speeds of 60 to 80 to 100 miles per hour. The thing about a derecho is whereas a downburst happens in one particular area, a derecho kind of feeds on itself and it moves laterally for hundreds of miles if it's a strong derecho.
Now, given what you said, I presume that you would not call yourself a storm chaser in the context that people have come to know them, like from watching movies like Twister, for instance. I assume you've seen that movie, right?
Absolutely, yes.
How true to life were the scenes in that movie? I mean, when I've actually seen tornadoes from, a bit of a distance, and obviously found them to be awesome and terrifying at the same time. But sometimes I think of, when I think of tornadoes, for instance, I think of scenes from Twister. I think of The Wizard of Oz, where the Dorothy's house is, plummeted into Munchkin land and all that type of thing. How realistic are some of those things when we're talking about a tornado, as far as the force and everything?
Right. Well, they can certainly affect those things, but they usually end up obliterating them rather than placing them in Munchkin land or allowing a pickup truck to stay within a multi-vortex tornado where cows are. That pickup truck would have been in the water. A lot of Hollywood went into that, and I personally know meteorologists who are really irate about that movie, and I know you're a purist and everything, but just take a breath, ease back. It's just a movie. The thing about the one thing that I can certainly point out about the tornadoes in Twister, they do not have a fine line like that. You can't run up and throw something into a tornado and run back to camp and say, "Hey, I just threw my mug of coffee into the tornado." Yeah, there's not that fine of a line. So when you get within certain hundreds of yards of the base of that tornado, debris is flying into it at such a force that if something hit you, even like my stapler here, if this hit me as it was being sucked into a tornado, it would knock me cold, and I'd be making my arguments in front of God. So,
sure.
A lot of Hollywood special effects went into that. And I will say this about Twister, and in the last few years, it's been very difficult to find people to fill TV weather jobs because the Twister effect is over. They saw Twister as a kid. They went to college to become a meteorologist, and now they've all gotten their jobs and they're in the business. So they're kind of in the hallways of the business. So when we have openings, that Twister effect, whereas we used to get 300, 400 people apply for one job, now we get 3 or 4.
Right.
So it was an interesting phenomenon to see that movie come out, and the popularity made a lot of people want to get into this business. But now, unless somebody comes up with Twister 2 or something, it's funny how that had an effect on the business that I work in.
Well, speaking of the business, and I want to revisit the issue of storms in comparison of the different type of storms in a moment here, but it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that when I was a kid, the weather person, the person reporting the weather, whether it's a woman or a guy, was not necessarily a meteorologist. It seemed to be someone who was simply reading or reporting the weather. Is that accurate? Is that true?
That's very accurate. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, it was just kind of the wave in the 70s that people, the TV stations were finally touting, we've got a meteorologist, the first and only one in town.
Right.
And now, a few years after that, we've got our own radar at the station, the only one in town. And, I think what that is representative of is the evolution of the TV news business.
Sure.
Think about a lot of the people who were on, and I'm not talking locally, but the first pioneers of TV were from Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And even as that trickled down to TV newsrooms across the country, they wanted people that would draw in viewers. I mean, either it was a pretty girl or somebody who had a great personality, or somebody who you knew from radio for years, and that was kind of interesting too, because they took a lot of their TV people from radio. You knew the voice, and a lot of these people had great faces for radio.
Right.
And the only way they were popular is because, I listened to this guy for 15 years on radio. Now I guess that's the guy I should watch on TV. Well, when the news business started to realize that, we're putting on a lot more news these days. I mean, we're adding morning shows and noon shows. We really need something to give us credibility.
Yeah.
That's when, and it was especially in the 70s, and I can almost pinpoint the time because it was just, we moved to Minneapolis in 71, and within about 2 or 3 years, we got the first round of Minneapolis meteorologists on TV. And the early to mid 70s is when that whole thing turned over, and they were looking for, degrees and credibility as opposed to a pretty face or somebody that you knew from, the storybook theater or whatever it was. So, and then the 80s came along, and TV budgets were huge. That's when you got the satellite trucks and the helicopters, especially, and 8 shows a day with 8 different anchor teams.
Right.
Well, that's those days are gone. I mean, it's not necessarily TV on a shoestring.
So anyway, I want to go back to the storms a little bit, because I think a lot of people find it fascinating when you're talking about these awesome weather events, comparing, what's the most dangerous now. Again, in kind of looking through this a little bit online, my take on it was that if you want to talk about the most dangerous as far as the immediate impact, you're probably looking, as far as the possibility of death and destruction, you're probably looking at a tornado, versus if you're looking over an extended period of time, the impact, you might be looking more at drought or flood. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it really just comes down to this, Dennis. I mean, the most dangerous type of weather is the one you're not prepared for.
Sure.
If you're not prepared for a tornado, and for years when I went to visit schools, kids would ask me, if I was out in the middle of a field and a tornado was coming at me, would I live or die? And I was just trying to be the coddling parent, I guess, and I was trying to soften that answer. Well, if you were, and that answer for me would never end in death, because I just didn't want to say to a kid, hey, you're going to die. And then 10, 15 years ago, I realized, I'm not doing him any favors by saying that.
Right.
Son, if you got caught in the middle of a field and a tornado was coming, you'd probably die. You just have to get that through people's heads. It's like, wherever you stand on issues like helmets and seatbelts, I mean, if you're using one of those and you have an accident, you're probably going to be better off than if you're not using one. So if you're prepared for a tornado, you're in the lowest level of your house, and you've got as many walls between you and the storm as possible. Does that mean you're going to be completely safe? No. A tornado could still hit your house, and everything in your house could collapse down on you and kill you. It's just you got to be that cut and dried about it. Flooding, if you're not prepared for a flood by seeking high ground, if it overtakes your car, if it overtakes you, if it overtakes something that you are in, such as a home or something, you could die. Wind. I've got a big tree out here in this. By the way, this is a new place for me, so I haven't gotten time to paint the purple wall behind me yet. And one of the projects is this tree out in the front of my house. It haunts me because so much of it hangs over the house. If that thing were to fall today on me right now, I might not,
Sure.
wake up tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So it just, whatever, there are short-term weather events like tornadoes. They're in and out in minutes, but then you get hurricanes, which pummel an area for hours, if not a day or two.
Sure.
Floods, which, as you know, can last for weeks, if not months. Mm-hmm. And it just comes down to the most dangerous weather that you can encounter is the one that you're simply not prepared for.
Yeah, and I actually recall also reading that probably on an annual basis, more people die from heat waves than anything else. And, that's something that at least I have not really come across as far as been, a lot of discussion about concerns. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while when the temperature's spiking, you'll hear people say, be sure you stay in, you keep your air conditioning on, make sure you've got a fan. If you know somebody who's, not maybe an elderly person who's not able to access that stuff, help them out, etc. But it's not one of those extreme weather events that you normally think of as being so dangerous. But evidently, it's probably the most dangerous annually.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think. The Chicago thing, was that night? It was all the way back in '97, was it? I think it was, but it seems so long ago. But still, the dramatic impact. And yeah, when you get that situation, a heat wave in Chicago, where the percentage of people not prepared for it is huge.
Right.
It can do some real damage. And another thing is lightning strikes. Lightning kills so many people because they just don't think it can happen to them. It does strike the same place twice. It can strike you even if you're next to a much taller structure or tree. I don't know if it's a Chicken Little thing, but yeah, when you're a kid, Mom said, don't run out in the middle of a thunderstorm. She was right.
Right. No kidding. Well, and it's funny because, again, pouring through the internet, you come across some strange stories, and one of you talk about Chicken Little, the sky is falling. I remember reading something about the question that was posed in one of these on one of these websites was, can it really rain frogs and fish or something like that? I'm like, what are they talking about? But they were talking about, obviously a situation where a wind, whether it's a tornado or something, picks these things up from a body of water and deposits them elsewhere. And I was like, that's a little misleading. I
have a book I should loan you. The title is literally Frogs and Fishes and Other Weather Folklore. And yeah, that's absolutely true. That's been known to happen, where wildlife gets picked up by a tornado, and you think of a tornado as something that's just whizzing across the countryside. Well, it's actually picking things up. That's vertical motion. Sure. And as it picks up lightweight things, it can distribute them in many different places.
Oh, for sure. Along similar lines, when I was researching, this was a question I had that I actually wanted to ask myself or figure out myself, was the distinction between hurricanes, cyclones, and typhoons. Now, as I understood it, it's really just a matter of geography where it's occurring. Like a hurricane is the tropical cyclone north of the equator in the western hemisphere, and then if it's on the eastern hemisphere, it's the typhoon, and then if it's
typhoon,
and then if it's Indian Ocean or South Pacific, it's cyclone. Is that about right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and Australia, I think they call them Willy Willies or something like that. but yeah, it's all the same storm. It's just a matter of location, and everything is a cyclone. All a cyclone is a low pressure circulation where the air is spinning counterclockwise and rising. And so, hurricanes, typhoons, they're all cyclones, and it's just that one area that actually calls them cyclones. Why we call them hurricanes, I guess it's just a more distinguishable. Not quite sure the history of it, but yeah, you're right. It's all based on geography.
So as far as like the intensity of the winds, is there a distinction as far as geography, and how does the intensity of the winds for a cyclone, no matter what you call it, compare to that, for instance, of a tornado?
Well, the Saffir-Simpson scale, which we use for hurricanes and tropical storms, is up to a 5 scale, and that covers lower end winds that a tornado. I mean, you can have up to 300 mile per hour winds in a tornado, even higher than that. But hurricanes, they never get that high. The wind speeds are never that high. The effect of a hurricane, yes, you can get winds of over 100 miles per hour, but it's the duration. I mean, you can have a house destroyed by a tornado in seconds with 200 mile per hour winds, or you can have a house destroyed by a hurricane in a matter of a day or so with 100 mile per hour winds. It's just a matter of duration. But as far as distinguishable winds are concerned, the potential for higher winds comes with the tornado. They just hit quicker,
sure,
and are gone quicker.
So what's a tsunami then? Is that just the wave that gets picked up by the?
Yeah, tsunami is a real clear-cut tsunami is caused by an earthquake. If there's a plate shift underneath the sea, that will, it's like if you have your hand in the bathtub and you lift your hand up really quickly, you'll see a surface reflection of that. Mm-hmm. The water will rise up at the surface and then spread out. That's a really simplistic way to describe a tsunami. What you'll get with a hurricane, all that wind-driven water, you will get a storm surge, and that's what the storm surge is. Mm-hmm. It's the wind-driven water which gets piled on itself to form a wall of water that can be, up to 15 feet in some cases, driving onto the shore. And the closer, of course, it gets to shallow water, the higher it gets, because there's no room for that water. There's less area beneath the surface of the sea for that water to extend. So as the shore comes up, as the shore comes up and the water rises up on that shore, that's the storm surge, and it gets higher the closer it gets to shore.
So tsunami, though, wouldn't really technically be considered a weather event, then, would it?
Right. Yeah. Right. Earthquakes and tsunamis, they're not technically meteorological events.
Sure.
And it just even here in the Mississippi, when we get Mississippi River flooding, that's not really a weather event. Now, the rain that might have caused it certainly is. But if it's a snow melt flood, it's not really a weather event per se.
Gotcha. So, speaking of weather events, I was curious as to what the rarest weather event was, and what I read was it's something called a fire rainbow. Are you familiar with that? A circumhorizontal arc. Yes. And what is that? And how does it differ from, I guess, your typical rainbow?
Well, one thing we get a lot of around here, especially in the fall and the spring and the wintertime, when we've got a lot of ice crystals, a lot of cirrus clouds in the sky, and the sun is at a lower angle, we get what are called sun dogs. And if you see those bright, they're like mini rainbows on either side of the sun. A circumhorizontal arc is when you get a full circle around the sun, you get those sun dogs kind of flashing out on either the left or right side, well, in this case, both left and right. And that arc that's circling the sun is rainbow colored, and just trivia, the red will always be in the inside. And, if you think about your Roy G. Biv, which is the colors of the rainbow, so it goes red, orange, yellow, out to the blues and the violets. It is rare because you need the sun at a particular angle, and you need the clouds that sun is shining through at a particular angle, and the ice crystals in that cloud to be a particular structure, because what's happening is just like in a sundog, just not all the way around the sun. The sunlight is hitting these ice crystals, which are simply like little prisms of glass, and splitting the light. So as the viewer is looking at the sun in one direction, those little ice crystals have split the light and throw it back to you from a different direction. And to get a circumhorizontal arc, again, you need so many things to line up properly in terms of the angle of the sun, the angle of the clouds, and the makeup of the ice crystals in those clouds, that, yeah, it doesn't happen very often. And even another optical phenomenon is what we call these things, luminous clouds or an iridescent cloud. And sometimes I've even seen them here, just little patches of color, as if you were spraying your garden hose up and toward the sun, and you see that little patch of color at some point. Sometimes we can get those in high clouds, and they just sit there for a while, and you think, well, wow, should I grab my camera and take a picture of this? Well, sometimes by the time you get your phone turned to camera mode, it's gone because everything's moved. Yeah, but and that is an optical phenomenon. You know, you can argue whether that's a weather phenomenon or a space phenomenon. But yes, that arc is very hard to see in terms of the frequency at which it happens.
Gotcha. Well, since we're talking about ice crystals, I'm going to shift a little bit and talk about another weather phenomena, and that's blizzards. So, like, what does it? How much snow, ice, wind, etc., does it take to actually constitute a true blizzard? And how often do we see true blizzards in the Midwest? It seems like every day in the winter at times, but
right. Well, you know, a blizzard is not based on snow. You can have a blizzard without snow. What a blizzard is based on is a 35 mile per hour wind for at least 3 hours.
Okay,
that's pretty much it. And if you have that coming in with a snow system, because that snow system is really winding up the winds, then you can get a blizzard with snow. And every blizzard will be different if it's a blizzard with snow in terms of how much the snow piles up, how much drifting you can expect. Obviously, if it's going to produce more snow, you'll get higher drifts. But then the next day, if another system comes by, or that system is still influencing the surface such that it's still producing winds over 35 miles per hour, you can have what is called a ground blizzard. And you can have blue sky with that. But once you get at ground level, that's where the visibility is going to drop because you're blowing that snow.
Right.
So really, and that's something that everybody asks about when we talk about blizzards. It's like, well, how much snow are we going to get with this one? Well, this storm is going to produce so much snow, but as far as a blizzard is concerned, and we don't always get time to explain that, you know, a blizzard isn't about snow or snow amounts. Some people think, well, if we get over a foot of snow, is that a blizzard? No, it has nothing to do with snow amounts, just the wind.
Got it. You know, since we're talking snow-related phenomena, one of the things I often find interesting and just kind of fascinating in you know the Midwest is when we have thunder snow as opposed to like a thunderstorm.
Sure.
What, if any, scientifically speaking, what's the difference between the two, and how infrequent do we see the thunder snow versus a thunderstorm?
I'll tell you, in the last few years, I've seen a lot more thunder snow than I ever have in my life. All it is, a thunder, what you need to get thunder is a very tall storm, a vertical storm that's got updrafts and downdrafts. So when we get that in the wintertime, it's essentially a very well-developed storm that instead of producing rain, produces snow. And, you know, you can still get a low pressure system, which is lifting the air, moving through an area in the winter, producing these isolated storms or these thunderstorms because they've got a lot of vertical lift. and they're producing the thunder, or they're producing the lightning because of the electrons being shot up into opposite polarities, which is essentially why you get lightning in the first place. You get that big spark. And sometimes you can see the lightning with thunder snow. Sometimes, usually you can't, because the snow clouds are so thick that you can't see that illumination versus a rain cloud in the warmer months. But when you do get a storm that's actually causing thunder snow, do the math. The heavy rain that you would get in the summertime, if that's snow, that can be extremely heavy snow. I mean, that can be a snow burst that can cause whiteout as long as that snow is or that storm is on top of you, and dump a quick up to 2 to 3 inches of snow as it passes by. But that's really all thunder snow is. It's a thunderstorm in wintertime.
Sure.
And it comes with a very well-developed winter storm.
Gotcha. Shifting from snow to just the opposite end of things, I was surprised to find, when listed among the different weather phenomena, wildfires. I guess I've never really considered that to be a weather event. How and why is that considered a weather event?
I think because going into, let's say there is a wildfire, and the last few years, isn't half of California usually on fire
exactly right
at any given moment? The weather phenomenon that causes that is drought conditions, lack of rainfall, just continued dry weather.
Sure.
Areas of low humidity, such that the vegetation never really gets a chance to thrive. And then if there is a fire that is started, then typically in those areas, you're also looking at wind-driven locations. Sure. or locations that have a lot of wind, simply because of the arid climate. Deserts aren't always very still. I mean, because of the heating and what we call differential heating, you get a lot of heat during the day, and that heat rises. Air's got to come in from all sides to replace that. So you can set up a static wind generation, or if it's, especially in California, what is known as the Santa Ana winds, when the wind is coming off the ocean, or I should say toward the ocean, and it's running into mountains, and those mountain passes where it gets squeezed, it's just like putting your thumb on the end of a garden hose. All of a sudden that wind speeds up. So any fires that do break out, the first thing you've got going against you is the amount of dry vegetation, and then throw in 80-mile-per-hour winds,
Sure.
which those winds literally can get to, and that fire spreads obviously very rapidly.
Yeah, and I guess I wasn't even considering the fact that we're talking drought or dry conditions plus the wind. Obviously, it's not necessarily what starts the fire, but what spreads it, what leads to it. Yeah, I gotcha. So for the listeners out there, this might seem a little disjointed, but but we're going to pick up, and I wanted to ask you about the kind of coursework that is involved in the kind of what is it that you have to do in order to become a meteorologist? And then the second part to that question is, do you have continuing education requirements?
Well, a lot of people ask me, how long do you have to stay in college to become a meteorologist? It's a 4-year degree. I mean, no longer than anything else. I mean, certainly you can master in it and pursue further education, but 4 years will get you in and out the door. But, realize it's a science, and so there's going to be physics, chemistry, math involved, and that scares a lot of people away. And besides all the basic and advanced meteorology courses, which go into dynamics and thermodynamics and the motion of the atmosphere and how things move, it's a pretty intense 4 years. There are some other ways you can do it. Some people get broadcast meteorology certificates, and it really depends on what you want to do. If you wanted to work for the Weather Service or be a forecaster in industry, power companies, airlines, railroads. That's where you want to stay focused on as much science as possible. If you want to be on the broadcast end, then you're also going to have to do things like take English classes, communication classes, public speaking classes, some broadcasting classes along the way, because that's going to be your environment, or if that's what you hope to end up being your final environment, you want to prepare for that as well. There are some certificate courses where you can really go to college and get a 4-year degree in anything, and then come back to some schools that are online ahead of their time, really, because they were doing this years ago. And you can get a certificate in broadcast meteorology, which essentially goes through all the meteorology courses that you take in a typical 4-year school, but it also gives you intense broadcast courses as well, and gets you set up to get a certificate in meteorology, broadcast meteorology. And with that, after a certain amount of years of experience, you can get certified with a seal of approval by either the National Weather Association or the American Meteorological Society. So there are a few ways that you can do it. But again, when somebody is looking at doing this as a career, they have to realize that it's a science, and everything that comes along with learning a science is what you can expect to go through course-wise.
Right. And as a science, I'm sure that there's new information that comes to light, new resources, new equipment, et cetera. How do you keep up on all of that? Are there continuing education, other types of opportunities for you?
Yep, there certainly are. Every year there are severe weather seminars. There are conferences put on by both the National Weather Association and the American Meteorological Society. For me, I'm sealed by the National Weather Association, so I've got to accumulate a certain amount of re-education credits every 3 years. And a lot of that, what I will do is I will go to the national conference, because what they will have there is a separate broadcast conference, and also the conference that deals with what we've learned in the last year, or new studies that have come out, how to use radar, what kind of storm structures we now recognize, and what you need to look for to be a better forecaster. Let's see, I had something on the top of my mind and it just left me. But yeah, so I'll do that, and every few years I might throw in a severe weather seminar, because there's one out of Des Moines that has in the last few years become a nationally recognized conference, and it's really good. Brings in a lot of people from severe weather circles, and kind of keeps us up to snuff on yearly developments there too.
So now on a daily basis, what is your typical routine in order to arrive at, the weather forecast for the day, right, or, a 5-day, 10-day forecast, whatever it might be?
Well, when I get in, the first thing that we do, because I work at a TV news outlet, is we have a news meeting, and I go in, and I'm pretty much always the first person to speak, because if weather's the one story that everybody's concerned about. If they're turning to a newscast, chances are they want to know what the weather forecast is going to be. Now, obviously, there are a lot of other ways to get that information these days. So if weather is important, if there's maybe a severe weather day or a storm coming, we do research, and we find that people still will come to the television because they like it explained to them and broken down and timing given to them, versus what they can see on an app or a website, the TV station website. They like it explained to them.
Sure.
So if I feel that weather should be the lead story, if we've got thunderstorms coming in the summer or a storm coming in the winter that's going to produce a lot of snow, that's what I talk about in my part of the meeting. My first few minutes, I'll tell people what the weather story is, really, and that's what it's boiled down to every day now, is what is the weather story? Okay, there's probably not going to be much of a weather story today, but boy, you're probably thinking already about the weekend, and if we've got rain coming this weekend, when is it going to rain, so you can make your plans around that. So what I'll do is I'll give my pitch at the news meeting. We'll decide how we're going to place that in the news shows. how we're going to build around it. If there's if there's video coming out of Denver of a huge snowstorm, and that's the one that's coming to us, we'll decide, okay, do we want to put those pictures in front of Erik so we can put some context into what he's going to tell us, or do we want to put that after Erik to say, hey, this is how it looked in Denver from this storm, so that's why we're paying so much attention to it, that kind of thing. So that's the first thing I do. I chat with the news department about the weather in our daily news meeting, of which we have two, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. Then when I go back to the weather center, I literally shoot a couple of promos to tell people, those little 10-second teasers that you see between talk shows, storms coming for the weekend, find out how much rain we're going to get tonight. And I'll record one or two of those. Then I sit down and I start looking at all the weather maps, the computer models. I look at numbers. I write down numbers. I write down what all these computers are telling me temperatures are going to be like. Then I look at the physical models on the map of the United States and see where the storm's coming from, when it's going to arrive here, what it's going to bring with it, rain, snow, wind, hot, cold, whatever. And that will be about pretty good hours worth of time to go through, sift through all that information. Then when I come up with a forecast, I'll usually actually come up with the 7-day forecast first, concentrating on the next the second or third day to day 7, because those at this point I can still be a little bit more general on those. And then when it gets closer to the newscast, I'm actually working on the specifics of the next 24 to 48 hours. Then when I got all that done, then I have to populate things like the app and the website, and I have to, work on some of the digital things. And then before the newscast, probably within, a half hour of the newscast, I'm actually working on the graphics that I'm going to show during the newscast. A lot of these things are set up ahead of time, like satellites and radars and such, but there are numbers that need to be plugged in, things I need to write to build those graphics. And I will, most days, my first show is at 4 o'clock, and I will literally, during credits of Paula Sands Live, or the last few seconds of Paula Sands Live, be putting the finishing touches on what I'm going to show at 4. So it's pretty cramped at the beginning. I don't have a lot of free time, but once we get into the newscasts, and this will be for 4. After the 4 o'clock show, I'm doing digital things. After the 5 o'clock show, I'm recording promos. And after the 6 o'clock show, I'm doing the final website update. I'm recording a weathercast for the web, and I am doing a live hit in Wheel of Fortune. And then by 7 o'clock, I've gotten the last of the list done, and I can take a breather and maybe go have some dinner unless there's severe weather coming, and then I'm staying at the studio watching the radar.
That sounds like a lot. I mean, it seems to break down to what you're doing to actually forecast the weather and what you're going to do to present that forecast.
Yeah.
But there's a lot involved in both of those things. Now, with respect to the forecasting, we kind of alluded earlier on to the business side of things and the fact that, instead of someone reading the weather, several years back, people wanted to build the credibility, and we started seeing meteorologists actually being hired by the stations to enhance credibility. And also become more competitive. And then you'd see, this station or that station, we've got Doppler radar, we've got triple Doppler radar, we're AccuForecast, First Forecast, etc. But as far as the forecasting itself, what are you looking at? You're looking at radar. You looking at maps and information from the National Weather Service, or what is it that's allowing you to come up with your 7-day forecast, for instance?
Well, I always say my best tool is a window. So when I'm driving to work, I'm keeping an eye on the sky. I'm looking at cloud patterns, just kind of figure out where in the spectrum of weather we are at the moment, because that's always your launch-off point. Now, all the computer models, and we refer to this all the time on the air. We'll say the computer models say this or that. I'm either buying it or I'm not buying it. These are either from NOAA, which of course is the United States government, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which one of the subsectors of NOAA is the National Weather Service. So when the National Weather Service makes their forecast, they're using the NOAA info as well. And all this info is publicly available these days because of the internet. It used to not be that way. We would wait in the weather office for these maps to be sent to us by satellite. And, when we got into the late 80s and 90s, the printers were a lot faster to give us these maps. So we could come into work and have numerous maps to look at. Before that, there were these things called NAFAX charts. And if you think about a fax machine back in the day, they were fairly slow, and a lot of times that piece of paper that you got on the other end was kind of messy. It wasn't very clean. It wasn't very neat. It was not very crisp in terms of detail. Well, I remember when I started out, we got these NAFAX charts, which were naval facsimiles, and they were being sent out to ships, essentially. And because we had access to those, we could get a few weather maps a day, and that was literally it. And these things came out on this wet paper. They literally left the machine, which took a good half hour to 45 minutes to do an 8 by 10 sheet of paper, or 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And with this wet paper and this blue ink, I mean, think back to when you were a kid and you used to get the copies at school, and you would smell them because that blue ink or that purple ink smell. That's essentially what our weather maps were for decades, and they were horrible in terms of detail. So I went from the Stone Ages now to the internet. We get a lot more models. We get what we call the European model, which is literally it comes out of France, and it's a conglomeration of European countries that put the money and funding into this model, which is a good model, by the way, for snow and long-range winter forecasting. But these days it's come down to getting on a few web pages, looking at these maps, which come out in very good detail, different levels of the atmosphere, different parameters, winds, temperatures, dew points, humidities, whatever, and looking at all of these and trying to figure out at least the average picture of the weather. Now, in the last few, I was off yesterday, but on Monday and Tuesday, we were going into these frosty nights, which here in the middle of May, they aren't unheard of, but they are kind of rare to get so many frosty nights in a row. And I was literally showing what we set up at the station are these plots of forecast temperatures for the entire TV6 viewing area. And I was telling people, explaining that the temperatures that I was showing, which were 37, 38 degrees, you might not think that that's a condition for frost, but those are what are called 2-meter temperatures. That's 6.5 feet where those temperatures are forecast for. If you drop in a frosty night that temperature to the ground, then you can lose about 4 or 5 degrees in just that much space. And that's why we're saying, even though you see these maps and your app is going to say 37, 38 degrees, you're still going to want to cover things up, because in the morning time, down at foot level or ground level where your plants are, it's going to be about 4 or 5 degrees colder. So when we use a computer model, we do have to use experience to say when the model's likely going to be right, or more importantly, likely going to be wrong.
Sure. Well, speaking of right and wrong, do meteorologists, are they required to track accuracy? Because you do see and hear some stations saying a most accurate forecast. What's that based on? And if you are, how does that work? Because someone can say, yes, I've determined it's going to rain, 99% of the time I'm right, but is it going to rain 1 inch? Is it going to rain 10 inches? I mean, how's accuracy defined, I guess?
Well, that takes a lot of study. I mean, simply because, it's easier if you're forecasting for one spot to keep records on that. But for any TV station, it's very difficult for the TV station to track that, because that would keep them busy all day long looking at all those stats. There are companies, I think there's actually one called Weather Rate, and some stations have Weather Rate on their banners that you see on top of their maps, and you can pay them to track the accuracy of that market's forecast. So if they happen to be the ones that are right most of the time, you can at least see that in some quantitative way. It's a lot of money, and it believe me, I'm not trying to say that there's no point in seeing who's the most accurate, or if we are accurate in the first place.
Right.
Generally, it's weather. It's very tough to get. I can forecast temperatures for a week, and I might get those high temperatures right 2 or 3 days. Based on a 7-day forecast. I will consider myself accurate in terms of temperatures. I give myself a 5-degree window. If I say it's going to be, 80 degrees, if it comes up 78, 79, 81, or 82, I figure, that's outside of my number, 2 degrees. That's pretty accurate. You could even take it down to a 3-degree window and be really accurate. But again, it's a tough thing to track, and for a TV station where I've got Maquoketa, Rock Falls, Geneseo, Burlington, the Quad Cities, Moline, and Davenport, where we have official stations, it would just take oodles of time to sit there and say, am I really accurate? And most importantly, how is that defined? Is it 1 degree off, 2 degrees off? Is it a tenth of an inch off in terms of rainfall? Here's the thing I found, and viewers are, believe me, viewers are the most honest people you're ever going to meet. Whether they like it or they love it, they're going to let you know. And that's why in this business, that's another thing, more so than schooling. If you go into broadcast meteorology, Dennis, get yourself a really thick skin.
I'm sure of that.
Especially now with social media and email. Boy, they don't like something, they're on your back right away, and they will pull no punches because they have that keyboard that's protecting them. But what I've heard more in the last few years from many of my viewers is like, we don't really care about accuracy so much as we want to learn about it as early as possible. If there's a chance of rain on Sunday, tell us what the chances are as soon as you can. Tell us the possible time frame as soon as you can. And then we'll continue to watch you, because we know weather changes and it's just a forecast. We'll continue to watch you as you make different decisions about that rain on Sunday based on newer information that you're going to get. And when I first started getting, viewers emailing me this or texting me this, whatever, I almost got down on my knees and said, thank you, Jesus, because it's the most comforting thing to know that they're watching you to follow along with a certain forecast, not just tuning in one day and walking away and say, yeah, that thing you said about Sunday on Monday, you were wrong. I can tell you right now, what I'm going to say about Sunday on Monday, it's going to fluctuate. But the people who take the time to tune back in and follow along, because it is important to them, and more importantly, they're choosing you to watch, to make those decisions the closer you get to a situation. That's all I could ever ask for, and I'm very thankful for viewers that have that kind of mindset.
Well, now I want to probably diverge a little bit from the science and get into some of maybe the folklore, and maybe it's an urban myth, I don't know. But for instance, one question I have is it true that you can tell the temperature by the cricket's chirps, for instance?
You know what? If you ask me that question, you're just going to get a But if you ask a farmer that question, he will have an answer for you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And, I've heard that one, and I couldn't tell you what the number of chirps or the timing of chirps is for this or that reason. But, these things, animals and wildlife are that in tune with nature. I mean, I had a friend when I worked up in Minneapolis. She lived near a pasture, and when she drove into work each day, she would text me, if the cows were lying down, she said, cows are lying down, must mean it's going to rain.
Right.
If that's the way that one goes, which I think it is, if I remember correctly. But there are a lot of sayings like that are based on historical fact, I guess, or historical observation, whether it's fact or not,
Sure.
because they tend to work.
They're kind of barometers, I suppose. Like my aching bones are pretty good barometers sometimes.
Yeah, and that's a really good one too. That's a really
Right.
good one, and that one does work because if you think about it, if there are spaces in your joints, well, when the pressure starts to drop, those spaces expand. You feel
Sure.
the pain, and if the pressure's dropping, there's a chance for stormy weather on the way, right?
Right. Well, what about the idea that you, by counting the seconds between lightning striking and then hearing the thunder, it can tell you how far away that strike was? That seems like it would be accurate, or
I've used that one for years, and it's never let me down, and it
Good.
really is true because you're simply dealing with the speed of sound. And sound essentially travels a mile in about 5 seconds. So every time you count to 5 after you hear a lightning or see a lightning strike, for each 5 you get till you hear the thunder, that's approximately in miles how far the storm that lightning strike was away from you. And gosh, I was going to say something about that, but anyway, but that one does work. That one does work.
Well, there's so many weather-related topics that we could continue to discuss, but we've already gone quite a while, and I want to hit some other things specific to Erik Maitland.
Okay.
I mean, for instance, some people are dog people, some people are cat people. Erik is a cat person.
Yes.
What is it about cats that you find so endearing and fascinating?
Anybody who has cats, anybody who doesn't have cats will never agree, but anybody who does have cats will tell you that their personalities are so intense and individual. I mean, I've got a guy here that he almost made an appearance because he jumped up on the desk to see what I was doing, and now in typical cat fashion, he's in the corner of the room and he just put his head on the carpet. He's going to be out now for an hour. Or,
by the way, I was going to say, by the way, that's probably why we've experienced technical difficulties, right? He's running across the keyboard.
Yeah, right, exactly. He's nudged all the plugs on my computer and disconnected me a few times. And so, but the thing is, I know about Rupert, my only cat now. As soon as I am done with this and I walk to either the bedroom or the kitchen, living room, basement, bathroom, he'll follow me. And he always wants to be where I am. But yeah, I've never had a cat that was the same as another cat. I love them because they're clean. You don't have to walk them in the middle of the night. They'll if they feel like it, they'll snuggle with you, and if they don't feel like it, they'll say, "Not tonight, buddy.
See you later."
Right. And they're just so fun to watch because you kind of wonder what's going through their mind. I mean, even about half an hour before we sat down to do this morning, he was in one of his flaky modes, and he was darting across the living room at about 80 miles an hour. He came out of the dining room, saw me walking down the stairs, and did an immediate 90-degree turn right into the chair and faced the chair. I thought, man, he's going to get up with a headache from that. And who knows why, but they are very entertaining. I've always loved them.
Well, and I know you're also very entertained, or at least an avid kayaker and scuba diver. And we've had discussions before that it's your hope that when you put this career behind you, that you can continue, teaching kayaking and or scuba diving. Is that still the plan? Is that what you're really hoping to do in the future?
Yeah, that's still the retirement plan. Of course, it'll be at a state farther south than here, so I can do it year round.
A little bit.
bet.
Yeah, I mean, I fell in love with kayaking. It's something I tried to get into for years, and I just never did. I mean, the first time I was really ever in a kayak was back when I was up in Minneapolis, and a store had a demo day out at one of Minneapolis or Minnesota's 10,000 lakes, and it was a really windy day, not good for kayaking, so it wasn't the day that was going to give me a good impression. I took the kayak offshore about 20 yards and just turned right back, and that's not going to do this. Then I got back to the Quad Cities in 2011, and in 2014 I went down to Burlington because a dealer down there had a demo day. It was a beautiful day. I got in a kayak and I didn't want to give it back. And from that day, that's all I could think about. So that summer I bought my own kayak, and the reason I became a certified instructor is because that first season I made so many mistakes. Dennis, literally, I should have ended up dead. I mean, one of the first trips I did with that kayak is because I love the Great Lakes. So I took it up to Lake Michigan. Had no idea what I was doing. And, I see a lot of kayak pages on Facebook, and it's, people don't realize that, one, whenever you get into a kayak and you're on a waterway that is commercially navigable, well, even any pond, you are now a captain. And there are a lot of responsibilities that come with that, a lot of things you need to know. And especially if people around here want to get out in the Mississippi River or go up to the Great Lakes, there are thousands of things they need to know about maritime law and just operating that boat safely. And they just don't think about it because they think, okay, we can go to Walmart, spend $150 and we're in a boat. Well, that's right. That's great. But you're really not prepared for what the saying is among instructors, people don't know what they don't know.
Sure.
And, it's just a matter of letting people know, hey, we can take you out for 2 to 3 hours. You'll learn a lot of things about how to paddle comfortably, how to paddle safely, and you won't start off making a lot of mistakes that could harm you. I mean, you wouldn't put – this is the thing about kayaking and a lot of outdoor sports like this. If you had a child that you wanted to teach to drive, if their friend just got their license 2 weeks ago, you wouldn't say, if you want to learn to drive, go to that friend and learn how to drive. Well, that's what a lot of kayakers do, and they end up in a lot of trouble sometimes.
So speaking of this far off, because of course you're not retiring until you're so young. Yeah, no. That's what I was going to ask you. So when does that day come, and then how far south are you intending to go in order to live this dream?
Well, I can't be sure of when it will come. I mean, it's a really good time to be in the business that I'm in right now. We have a lot of technology that we can take advantage of, and it's just been my passion for so many years. I can't think about hanging it up right away. I mean, obviously the world of broadcasting is changing very quickly now, year by year. So if I've got 3 more years or 10 more years, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm prepared for both. But sure. Whenever I decide to hang up the microphone, whatever you want to say, I would like to go down to Florida or the Gulf Coast area. Kayaking certainly is something I could do down there. A kayak instructor. I find myself becoming more of a hermit because I'm not interested in anything else that I could really make a living at. I can't make a living being a kayak instructor. Can't make a living. I can barely squeak by being a scuba instructor. But there are scuba diving jobs that I could certainly get with the experience that I'm working on building now. Sure. That would give me a nice living down there. So that's kind of the plan. I mean, if you ask me in 2 hours, it might change, but
I hear you.
That's on the bulletin board right now, at the highest point of the bulletin board.
Well, obviously, as I mentioned, we could talk all day. There's all kinds of other questions that I wanted to get to, but I've monopolized so much of your time. And after hearing what your daily routine is, I know I can't take up too much more. So I want to play a quick game with you before I let you go. Just want to play a little
a little would you rather.
All
okay,
right. Sounds good.
So this one is directed, of course, at those model good looks that you have. Would you rather be bald or forced to wear a mullet all the time?
Oh, well, I rocked the mullet back in the 80s, so I think I'm going to take the mullet.
All right.
As long as it's not in my eyes, I don't care what's going on in back.
There you go. All right. Would you rather speak in rhyme all the time? I just did it. Or speak in riddles all the time?
Oh, see, I like a good riddle. I'd like to speak in riddles just because, and sometimes I do that to Michelle, and I love the look that I get on her face of, why are you doing this to me again? I'd like to speak in riddles.
All right. Would you rather have a hook for a hand or a peg for a leg?
Ooh. If I could get the hook on my left hand, I'd do the hook because I do a lot of things. I like to run and jog, and I'd probably do the hook.
I mean, I guess either of those could impact scuba and kayaking. So
I suppose.
I suppose. Okay. Would you rather hang out with someone who never stopped talking or someone who never stopped texting?
Ooh. I hate when we're out at dinner and people have their phones on the table. I always put mine in my back pocket. So I guess I'd endure the talking rather than the texting. Because they might say something interesting and it would be toward me as opposed to toward somebody on the phone.
There you go. All right, last one, and this is kind of weather related. Right. Would you rather shovel snow or rake leaves?
I love the fall. Give me leaves over snow anytime.
Me too. Well, as I said, Erik, I've got tons of things that I'd love to have you come back at some point so we could, revisit some of these other topics and dig a little deeper. But I definitely appreciate your time today. I thank you for being here with us. I would love to come back anytime. Thank you. And you're really good at this. Maybe I should watch out. I mean, the broadcasting world has, if they have room for one more, maybe you better start sending out tapes because you're doing well, it's not too much different than taking depositions, which I've done a little bit of for a long time. I suppose. So anyway, thank you so much, Erik. And as always, I want to thank everyone else for tuning in. Again, we would appreciate you subscribing or registering to Uncommon Convos on your favorite podcast forum. Also, please don't forget to check out Legal Squeaks and learn a little bit about some of the legal and consumer issues that might impact you on a daily basis. Make sure you also check out uncommonconvos.com if you'd like to see the video version of this or other episodes. And in the meantime, we'll see you next week. Please have a great day, be safe, and love you all.